Today, the Matt Walsh Show, the First Amendment has been suspended in Seattle as the city allows Antifa militants to accost and assault Christians at will. Also, King Charles delivers a land acknowledgement in Canada, and Secret Service agents are suspended after getting into a fight with each other on the job. If that sounds familiar, it's because the same thing happened last year, and all of the agents involved in both cases are women. What unapproved conclusions might we draw from that? All of that and more today on the Matt Walsh Show. Before we start the show, I want to tell you for a limited time, you can save 40% on your new DailyWire Plus membership. Head to dailywireplus.com and use code DW40. You know, we're all feeling it. Costs are rising on everything: gas, groceries, home repairs. And if you're a homeowner, you've probably thought, should I call American Financing to refinance and pay off this credit card debt? Then you second guess yourself because of that low mortgage rate that you currently have. Well, listen, that low rate, it's not saving you if you're drowning in credit card interest at 25% or more. That's the math that no one wants to face, but it's costing you thousands of dollars. Here's the truth. If you're only making minimum payments, that debt will follow you for years. And that's why people are calling American Financing, because they're saving customers an average of $800 a month by using their equity to finally break free from credit card debt. You owe it to your family to see what's possible. No upfront fees, no pressure. It costs you nothing to find out what you could save every month. And if you start today, you may be able to delay 2 mortgage payments. Call American Financing today, 866-569-4711. That's 866-569-4711, or visit americanfinancing.net/Walsh. As of the latest official count, there are a grand total of 195 nations on the planet. And if you consult a history book, they'll tell you that we've had 195 nations for more than a decade, ever since the sovereignty of South Sudan was recognized in East Africa during the Obama administration. Who could forget that moment? Ask any person off the street and they'll tell you with a sparkle in their eye exactly where they were on the momentous day when South Sudan became a country. I know I'll never forget. Unfortunately, all the rubes who buy into this narrative are being lied to. In reality, South Sudan is not the newest nation that's been formed. That's because for a brief, shining moment, back in the summer of 2020, a brand new country was born, of all places, right here, inside the United States. The Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or CHAZ, became the 196th nation, seemingly out of nowhere. The local homeless population teamed up with the Antifa and trans activists. They cordoned off a 6-block radius in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood, seized control of the East Precinct Police Station, named a warlord/rapper named Raz as their king, and declared their independence. You are now leaving the USA, read a sign at the entrance to CHAZ. Heavily armed border guards and improvised fencing made sure that no unauthorized migrants could enter, because, of course, there's nothing progressives love more than border walls as long as they're protecting their own property. Seattle's government recognized CHAZ's independence for a time. They seemed fine with the fact that the Chazistanis had taken over a police station and seceded from the United States. For his part, the state's governor, Jay Inslee, defended CHAZ's right to exist, telling Donald Trump that it was a peaceful commune. But after a month or so, things began to break down, predictably. First of all, black children started getting shot to death inside of CHAZ. Secondly, CHAZ's top scientists determined that human beings cannot survive on marijuana alone, it turns out. And then, in a panic, they tried to make a community vegetable garden to produce actual food, but it didn't work out. I mean, generally, any garden made in a panic is not going to work out. That's not the right mindset to be in when you're making a garden. So eventually, the Chazistanis gave up. The authorities reclaimed control of the area, and they pledged that going forward, all American citizens would be able to access the Capitol Hill neighborhood. CHAZ, it seemed, would be relegated to a rather embarrassing footnote of American history. That was the promise anyway, but it was never true. CHAZ may be defunct as an official nation, but Seattle's pink-haired leftist contingent, which is to say 99% of Seattle's population, still believes that they have full control over the region. And they're right, frankly. To this day, unapproved opinions are not allowed within the borders of the region formerly known as CHAZ. The right to free speech remains suspended in that 6-block radius. If you express your religious and political beliefs in that area, and those beliefs happen to be remotely conservative or Christian or sane, but I repeat myself, then you will be physically assaulted at a minimum. And nothing will happen to the people who attack you. In fact, your attackers will receive the official endorsement of the government of Seattle. 5 years after Chaz was supposedly disbanded, it remains a lawless, violent place where the Constitution does not apply, a place where Christians are persecuted and radical terrorism is rewarded. And that explains what happened this past Saturday at Seattle's Cal Anderson Park, which was the centerpiece of Chaz back in its very brief glory days. The pro-life group Mayday USA held an event in the park as part of their Don't Mess With Our Kids campaign. This was a lawful gathering, by all accounts. They had all of the required permits. And at this event, people held signs and they sang songs that affirmed the sanctity of life, the reality of human biology, the importance of the nuclear family, and so on. It was basically a Christian concert. And people of all ages, including young children, were present. Here's what it looked like. This is footage from the reporter named Jonathan Cho, whose name is, we'll get back to in a moment. But here's what this event looked like for context. Watch.
Hundreds of Christian worshipers flooded Seattle's Cal Anderson Park Saturday afternoon to pray for the city and take a stand for traditional family values.
You will not disrespect the blood of Jesus Christ!
Especially against transgender ideology targeting children, all part of the Mayday USA revival movement sweeping across the nation.
And the Lord says, sound the alarm! Sound the alarm! Lift up your voice!
So just as I said, kind of a Christian concert. Everyone is peaceful. Everyone seems sort of normal and like they've bathed some point in the last 2 weeks, which is odd for that part of Seattle or any other part of Seattle, really. But they're not bothering anyone. They're not exposing themselves in public as LGBT activists do at every so-called pride parade. Instead, they're peacefully expressing their beliefs, which is obviously protected activity under the First Amendment. But as the event went on, left-wing activists decided that they'd had enough of it, and so they were going to shut it down. And they began violently assaulting police officers and stormed the stage. Watch.
Far-left activists and Antifa militants tried to disrupt the concert, throwing water balloons at the crowd, menacing attendees, and some activists even tried rushing the stage.
I would say there's two kingdoms clashing here today. There's the kingdom of God, and then there's the kingdom of Satan.
As the day progressed, another group of trans activists marched into the park, adding to the number of people targeting followers of Jesus Christ with nasty messages, vile curse words, and full-blown debauchery. But even with the taunting, middle fingers, and disparaging comments, Folake Kellogg says prayers of love and forgiveness were sent to their attackers on the other side.
Not only do we come here to show the love of God, but we hope that by the time we are done here, that the atmosphere in Seattle will change.
One of the funny things you notice when you watch any video where left-wing activists are showing up is that every single one of them, they're either rail thin, like it looks like if they tried to lift a gallon of milk, their arms would snap off, or they're 150 pounds overweight. And there's no in between. There's just, with left-wing activists, there's not going to be a healthy BMI found anywhere. So anyway, the woman in that clip really makes the point about as well as you possibly can. On the one hand, you have people who are evil and profoundly disturbed, basically demonic. They're screaming profanities, exposing themselves, attacking innocent people, attacking police officers. They're all very clearly unhappy, unwell. On the other hand, you have people who are smiling, singing, preaching about Christ and the importance of forgiveness. Now, as far as contrasts go, this is about as stark as you can get. And by the way, the Christians were minding their own business. They weren't trying to disrupt any other event. They weren't hassling anyone. Like I said, they reserved the park using all of the appropriate legal channels. But the demons decided to charge in and use violence to silence the Christians. And eventually they got what they wanted. The police arrested 22 adults and 1 juvenile, all of them on the side of the left-wing activists. And then they shut down the event early. Now, hearing all of this, you might be tempted to say that as bad as it is, at least the police intervened. I mean, at least the government stepped in and addressed the lawlessness and the anti-Christian terrorism that occurred. But actually, in every relevant respect, the government of Seattle has taken the side of the LGBT activists who attacked the Christians. First of all, everyone who was arrested was released without any bond whatsoever, and no charges have been announced. There's one exception, someone who was accused of attacking an officer and throwing an explosive device, who received a whopping $20,000 bail. But otherwise, none of these people have suffered any real consequences, and of course, they never will. And there's zero chance that any of them will be prosecuted in Seattle. We all know that. Secondly, the mayor of Seattle, a wormy little man named Bruce Harrell, who's cursed with the same IQ as the warlord King Raz, but with none of the charm or the rap skills, released a statement over the weekend that blames the Christians for being attacked. This is one of the more extraordinary statements that you'll see from a public official. It's actually more insane than anything that King Raz said when he was running Chaz. Here's what the mayor said, as reported by the DailyWire. Quote, "Seattle is proud of our reputation as a welcoming, inclusive city for LGBTQ plus communities, and we stand with our trans neighbors when they face bigotry and injustice. Today's far-right rally was held here for this very reason, to provoke a reaction by promoting beliefs that are inherently opposed to our city's values in the heart of Seattle's most prominent LGBTQ plus neighborhood. Anarchists infiltrated the counter-protesters group and inspired violence, prompting SPD to make arrests and ask organizers to shut down the event early, which they did. While there are broad First Amendment requirements around permitting events under free speech protections, I am directing the Parks Department to review all of the circumstances of this application to understand where there were legal location alternatives, whether there were legal location alternatives or other adjustments that could have been pursued," close quote. Now, for a moment, let's just assume that everything the mayor said is true. I mean, it's not true, and we'll get to that in a second, but let's just assume that it is. Let's assume that a group of far-right radicals decided to assemble in a prominent LGBTQ neighborhood and sing songs with the deliberate goal of provoking a reaction. Now, even in that scenario, which again is not what happened, there would still be obviously zero justification for left-wing activists to violently assault the demonstrators. And that should be the entire statement from the mayor. Period. End of discussion. There's no reason that you should need to review why the permit was awarded. There's no reason to talk about how inclusive you are to LGBTQ plus communities. Instead, as the mayor, your job is to ensure that every citizen is able to enjoy their constitutional rights, and that should be the entire discussion. But Mayor Bruce isn't interested in ensuring that Christians can enjoy their constitutional rights, and that's why he labeled them far-right. It's why he dismissed the violence by suggesting that only a handful of anarchists were responsible. And it's why he issued his unconstitutional order to the Parks Department, demanding that they review why the Christians received the permit in the first place. Now, just to be very clear about this, in the U.S., a heckler's veto is not permissible under the First Amendment. The government cannot shut down free speech on the grounds that violent activists will start terrorizing the community if free speech is allowed to occur. I mean, that's very well-established law in this country, and the Trump administration recognizes that. At the DOJ, Harmeet Dillon, who now runs the Civil Rights Division, just made that clear on social media. She's already suggested that Seattle's mayor is violating the Constitution, which he is, and the FBI is now investigating the mayor's office as well. Here's what the Deputy FBI Director Dan Bongino wrote on social media, quote, "We've asked our team to fully investigate allegations of targeted violence against religious groups at the Seattle conference. Freedom of religion isn't a suggestion." So that's a good start, obviously. At the same time, even if the mayor's office is hauled before a federal court, the truth is there's a much deeper problem here. The mayor, after all, was elected by the people of Seattle, and unsurprisingly, in this case, most of Seattle, including the media, agrees with the mayor. So here's one news report, just for example.
The mayor was involved in this and is asking how this happened.
Yeah, so Jake and Mimi, the mayor and other city leaders are asking why the city authorized Cal Anderson Park and Capitol Hill for the religious rally. We know the rally was permitted through Seattle's Parks and Recreation Department. The event was organized by On Fire Ministries. It's a religious organization that says they do not support the LGBTQ community. Multiple local organizations counter-protested the group. They told King 5 that they're livid that the rally was allowed to happen in Cap Hill in the first place.
So what you're going to put an anti-queer group that tries to do conversion therapy with people in the middle of Cal Anderson Park, named after the first openly gay legislator in Washington state history.
8 of the people arrested were in court yesterday, all accused of assaulting police. On Saturday, 1 officer was hurt and had to be taken to the hospital. Now, police are also echoing concerns about safety, saying, quote, "What we are struggling to understand is why was this park chosen and authorized? This city decision, as naive or deliberate as it was, put police officers in an untenable predicament."
Now, the activist they interviewed is basically saying that no Christians or conservatives are allowed in their gay park. That's what this amounts to. She says, you're going to put an anti-queer group in the middle of Cal Anderson Park, named after the first openly gay legislator? Well, actually, yeah. I mean, why not? You don't get to assault Christians because you name the park after a gay guy. That's not how this works. And this is common sense in most of the free world. But it's not common sense in Seattle. She's saying that the LGBT movement can exercise unilateral control over everything that happens in the park, just like they controlled Chaz. And the news media and the police union seem to agree with that sentiment, along with the mayor. No one at this news station pushed back in the slightest. Admittedly, I'm not a huge fan of the term victim blaming, but this is a pretty extreme case of victim blaming. Like, it's like if you're going to use that term to apply to anything, well, here it is. They're attacking Christians for daring to show up in a public place in the center of the Capitol Hill neighborhood, as if there are, as if these are like no-go zones in a major American city. Of course, we all know that there are no-go zones in major American cities. Democrats have made sure of that. But all the same, it's pretty remarkable for them to basically admit it out loud. And it's especially remarkable when you realize that, contrary to the mayor's statement and all these media reports, the Christian group did not actually come up with the idea of holding their event in Cal Anderson Park. Instead, that idea came directly from the mayor's office. So just take a look at these 2 emails. These emails were posted by Pastor Russell Johnson, who helped organize the May Day USA rally in the park. And he says it's an email that his group received from the mayor's office as they were planning the rally. And here's what the mayor's office wrote, quote, "The capabilities of Pike Street unfortunately don't match up appropriately to successfully facilitate what's being proposed, including available space to safely facilitate the expected number of attendees while also maintaining public access to all businesses along the sidewalks flanking the roadway. I would suggest considering other Seattle Park locations. When I connected with the Parks Department last, Cal Anderson Park on Capitol Hill and South Lake Union Park on the south side were both available. Thank you for your understanding," close quote. So in other words, the mayor's office, the same people who are now saying that the Christians were deliberately provoking the trans activists by staging their event in the gay park, were the ones who suggested that Christians hold their event in that park in the first place. So, and that's again, by the way, if they had chosen that park to be provocative, fine. I'd be personally, I'd be totally fine with that. In fact, I would say congratulations, well done. That's like the perfect place to hold this. If I was holding, a Christian event, a concert, if I was involved in organizing it, I would be looking, I'd say, like, put it right there. That's exactly where it should be. But that's not what actually happened. They were told by the mayor's office to go there. So this is a level of cowardice and hypocrisy and moral decay that even by the standards of the city of Seattle is really quite something. And to their credit, Christians in Seattle are not tolerating. Yesterday evening, they marched peacefully on City Hall, and here's what that looked like. Again, the contrast is remarkable. I mean, there you have just like the only people in the city of Seattle who practice proper hygiene were all found in that event. All of them were there. And again, they're dancing and singing and having a good time, even as they're getting their message out. But once again, the demonic Antifa militants were not peaceful or sane. Instead, they became violent once again. So here are 3 clips. One of them is footage of several left-wing activists mobbing the reporter Jonathan Cho and ultimately making contact with him, which prompts Cho to defend himself. Another clip shows an apparent assault on a detransitioner who was outside City Hall. And a third clip shows a mother and her baby being surrounded by an Antifa mob before a fight breaks out. Watch.
Stay away, don't come even near me. Don't even come near me. You know what's going on? I'm here to cover it. Not your community.
Why?
Because
what do you mean, why? What were they doing Saturday, dog? What are they doing Saturday, dog? Oh, you don't have time to tell people what's the drink, what's happening?
Hey! Get the back! Get the back! Hey, police! This guy just assaulted somebody. Move back! Move back! Back up! Back up! Back up! Back up! Back up! Back up! Yeah, that's right, Floyd. Back up! Back the up! Can you stop? Hands off me, you piece of
Now, there's a lot more footage like this. There's also a video of Antifa mobs screaming, "F your kids," as a man shouts back, "Jesus loves you." In every single one of these cases, it's the left-wing activists who are terrorizing Christians and conservatives. You're not going to find a single clip of a Christian demonstrator, going out of his way to assault some trans activist or prevent a trans activist from filming or anything like that. I mean, this kind of thing only happens in one direction. And it's going to continue to get worse in all likelihood. The mayor I mentioned earlier is actually considered to be relatively moderate in Seattle, if you can believe it. I mean, there are definitely more left-wing candidates hoping to replace him. And they have an election later in this year, in fact. And as you can tell by the mayor's statement, which is clearly designed to appease the violent left-wing mob, those other radical candidates have a very good chance of success in the upcoming election. So that raises a few questions. Like, how long until Seattle elects someone who runs on an explicit platform of attacking Christians and conservatives? How long will Christians be allowed to gather in any park at all in the city? How long will Christians receive any police protection in the city? Yesterday, we talked about the eradication of the freedom of speech in the UK in the context of a 41-year-old woman who was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison for sending a tweet. And as troubling as that case was, it's not a phenomenon that's unique to the UK. And it's happening here as well. A very powerful political faction in this country doesn't believe that you have constitutional rights. If you say something that they find bigoted or hateful, they think that you have no right to say it, that you've forfeited your rights. That's what's happening in the UK. That's like very explicitly how things are being enforced. And that's what the left believes here too. And they're doing everything in their power to ensure that when they come for you, the government takes their side and leaves you to fend for yourself. 5 years after the alleged destruction of Chaz, its founding principles are still alive and well in Seattle. And if these people succeed, if they're allowed to turn a city of 800,000 people into a commune where Christians are lynched for their beliefs, they're not going to stop. They'll apply these same tactics to every other major city in the country. Their goal is to outlaw Christianity to whatever extent they can. And if there's anything encouraging about what's happening in Seattle at the moment, it's that tens of thousands of Christians are making it very clear that they're willing to fight back. And now every Christian in the country, along with everyone else who values the fundamental principle of freedom of speech, should join them in that fight. Now let's get to our 5 headlines. Summer's almost here, and that means dads are firing up the grill for those backyard barbecues. But did you know that over 85% of grass-fed beef in U.S. stores is actually imported? That's why I trust Good Ranchers. At goodranchers.com, they source 100% of their meat from American farms. Every cut of beef, chicken, and pork is born, raised, and harvested right here in the USA. Plus, there are no antibiotics, no added hormones, no seed oils, just real quality meat delivered straight to your door. Perfect for when you want to show off your elite grilling skills without the grocery store hassle. Just yesterday, actually, we just made their Italian seasoned chicken, which is one of my favorite things to make, and it comes pre-seasoned. So it makes you seem like a good cook, even when you're not. Give the fathers in your life what they really want this summer, premium American meat that they can be proud to serve. Good Ranchers connects your family to American farms with convenient delivery that makes every backyard barbecue better. That's meat you can trust. Visit goodranchers.com and get $40 off plus free meat for life with my code Walsh. Again, that's goodranchers.com for $40 off plus free meat for life with my code Walsh. Good Ranchers, American meat delivered. All right, before we get to the headlines, a little programming note here. I wanted to let you know that starting this week, this show will be going to 4 days a week. We'll be doing 4 days a week for the foreseeable future instead of 5. And I'll be very transparent about the reason for that change. And the reason is that despite appearances, it actually takes an enormous amount of time to prepare and write this show every day, which is fine. The problem is that then I have very little time to work on my other projects, and that's why my other projects, like the last 2 movies, each took about 2 years to make for this reason. So I'm bringing the show down to 4 days a week so that I can use the extra time to work on a couple of other projects. In particular, I can't tell you anything about them at this juncture. I can't give you any more information, but I can say that if you have been following the show for a while, then you can remember the past when I've said, I got to take some time, I got to change the schedule a little bit because I'm working on other projects. And you know that when I say that, we will deliver. It may be a while, but it will come. So I wish I could give you more information and say more, but I can't. So, but that's the plan. That's the plan for now. So stay tuned. Let's start with this, I think. King Charles gave a speech in Canada yesterday for some reason or another. I don't know. Doesn't matter. And he decided to begin his speech with a land acknowledgement. And let's listen to that.
I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and the Anishinaabe people. This land acknowledgement is a recognition of shared history as a nation, while continuing to deepen my own understanding. It is my great hope that in each of your communities and collectively as a country, a path is found toward truth and reconciliation in both word and deed.
Pathetic, of course. And it also pretty hilarious. I always get a kick out of the term unceded when it's used in these things, unceded. Yeah, we know that it was unceded. Of course you didn't cede it, because that's not how this works. The land was conquered by a superior civilization, just as you conquered it from whatever Stone Age tribe had it before you had it, and so on and so on. I mean, they didn't cede it to you. You didn't cede to us. That's not how any of this works. There was a giant wilderness, which was basically the entire Western Hemisphere, and there was only one way to determine who gets to claim possession of it, and that was conquest. And you had a whole bunch of different groups vying over the course of hundreds of years. And the European settlers, the European powers, won that war. That's it. They won. Sorry about your luck, but you lost the war. So that's how it goes. And Europeans won the game of conquest because their civilization was superior to the one that it supplanted. And you might ask, well, what do I mean by superior? In what sense? And I would say in literally every sense. By every possible metric is what I mean. So that's it. So in any case, even aside from that, land acknowledgements are self-contradictory, because if you actually think, of course, I'm not the first person to point this out, but it is true that if you actually think the land was stolen, or that you're occupying land that was unceded, or whatever that means, then why haven't you given it back? I mean, that's the really funny thing. The person who does the land acknowledgement to assuage their guilt, only in that act actually inherits guilt. Like the thing you do to be rid of guilt makes you guilty, actually. So what I mean is, if you actually think that you have no moral right to be on the land that you're occupying, well, then in that case, you have a moral responsibility to give it back. Because if you don't, then by your own testimony, you are a thief and a burglar and worse. Now, I'm not. I reject the premise. I don't believe that I'm on stolen land. I don't think that conquest is theft, because it isn't. Because for one thing, theft implies ownership. But when you've got an entire side of the world where various groups are migrating to it, coming to it, and there's a battle of civilizations that goes on for not really hundreds, but thousands of years, there's not one single group that can say, I own this entire side of the world. Doesn't work that way. Nobody owned it. And so there was this war that went on and on and on and on and on through the centuries. So that's the difference between conquest and theft. So whatever the group is, what was the group that he was apologizing to there? It's like, oh, well, this was how was it their land? Why was it theirs? Well, they were here first. No, they weren't, actually. They actually weren't here first. Whoever was there first was like those people are long gone, millennia ago. So they weren't there first, and that's the way conquest goes. So I reject the premise. I would say that this land was conquered fair and square, morally and rightly. That's the fact. That's a fact. I recognize that fact. So I have no guilt. Quite the opposite. I have pride. I'm immensely proud of the fact that I'm on conquered land. But if you actually think differently, if you actually think that you are somehow guilty of theft, then in that case, you have a responsibility to act on that belief. I don't have a responsibility to act on your beliefs. They're your beliefs. I don't believe that. But if you do, then yeah, you should give your land up. If you're some woke liberal and you go around and say, oh, we're on stolen land, and like if you live next door to me, then I would say, well, then you need to move. You need to give your house up. And you can't say to me, well, are you going to give yours up? No, I'm not giving mine up because I'm not on stolen land. I don't think that. I don't believe that. But you do, according to you. So if you don't give your land up, then you are a thief by your own admission. It's like this. Imagine that I found $20 lying on the ground, right? Now imagine that the $20 is actually my money, that it fell out of my pocket, but I don't know it, right? And so that means that there's $20 on the ground. It's actually mine, but I don't know that. I think that it's somebody else's. So if I take the money and pocket it for myself, I'm stealing. Because by my own, I'm not actually taking, like it really does belong to me, but I'm trying to steal by my own. I am, in that case, guilty of the sin of stealing, at least in my heart, if not actually. So even though I didn't actually steal anything in reality. And these land acknowledgement types are kind of like that. They supposedly think that they're guilty of theft. They aren't, but they think that. At least they say they do. And yet they don't do anything to make it right. So it's very similar. I've made this point many times about the climate alarmists. See, I have no guilt about driving my gas-guzzling vehicles around. We have multiple gas-guzzling vehicles. We have a massive van that takes diesel, and we drive that thing thousands of miles a year. Just all kinds of emissions going. I mean, we're so many. We've single-handedly killed entire families of polar bears with our thing. I have no guilt about it because I know that the climate change narrative is bogus. So I'm fine. But if I actually believed that I was bringing about the destruction of the planet by driving my cars around, then in that case, I would have a responsibility to stop driving and to stop flying and to make any number of other lifestyle changes. And if I didn't do that, then I would be guilty of a horrific sin. Because in my own mind, I am deliberately killing the planet. I'm bringing about the destruction of humanity in my own mind. And yet I'm doing it anyway. So it's the same for the land acknowledgement thing. Now, the answer in both cases, of course, is that the climate alarmist, the liberal doing the land acknowledgement, they don't actually believe what they're saying. But I guess my point is that I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt when I say that they don't believe what they're saying. Because the other option is that they do believe it. The other option is that they actually believe that when they drive their car, they are personally contributing to the destruction of human society. And yet they're doing it anyway. What a bunch of sociopaths, if that's the case. All right, Daily Mail has this report. Shocking footage captured the moment that two female Secret Service agents fought with each other outside former President Barack Obama's $8 million D.C. mansion. The altercation unfolded May 21st at around 2:30 a.m. as the former president's security detail grappled next to a police vehicle. The agent, and there's an audio, the agent says, "Can I get a supervisor down to Delta 2 immediately before I whoop this girl's ass?" It comes a year after a Secret Service agent assigned to then Vice President Kamala Harris was removed from duty after she got into a physical fight with her fellow agents. So here's a quick clip of this altercation. I don't know if there's sound to this. I don't think there is. Let's take a look. No sound. Okay, so there they are. Great. Secret Service agents. That's what you like to see from Secret Service agents, isn't it? Are those Secret Service agents or are they Waffle House patrons? It's impossible to tell. The Waffle Houseification of American society continues, which is great. And by great, I mean catastrophically terrible. So just a review here. Over the past year, multiple Secret Service agents have been suspended for getting into fights with each other on the job. And according to this report that I just read, all of them are female. So add this to the list of very obvious patterns that we're not supposed to notice. And if we do notice, we're not supposed to draw any unapproved conclusions from the pattern that we noticed. And this is the game, you know. The left puts these DEI policies in place, insists that we must diversify, we must include women into traditionally male occupations and so forth. And then when planes start crashing, when helicopters are steered directly into passenger jets, when Secret Service agents are getting into catfights, we're not supposed to see any of that as evidence against the policy, because nothing that happens can ever be evidence against it. So they put the DEI policy in place, and then we say, you know, we really shouldn't do that because this policy will have a bunch of negative consequences. And then they say, oh yeah, what kind of negative consequences? And then we point and say, well, those. Like, you see that? Oh, you see those, like the cat fight between secrets, like that? The female helicopter pilot steering a helicopter directly into a passenger plane, killing dozens of people, like that kind of thing. And then when we say that, they say, oh, well, you know, those don't count. What other evidence? Okay, well, here, how about this, that, and this? What about this and that? What about that? Yeah, none of that counts. None of it counts. That's the way it goes. It never counts. Every negative consequence is always just somehow an aberration, an exception, no matter how frequent it is, no matter how foreseeable it is. And in reality, this goes to show why it is absurd to include women in these kinds of jobs. It is just ridiculous. I'm sorry. Well, I'm not really sorry. It is ridiculous to have female Secret Service agents. It is absurd. It's cartoonish. Like, it's laughable. There's no good reason for it. There's no legitimate reason to open up these jobs to women. There just isn't. You cannot tell me that there aren't enough qualified men to fill these roles. You cannot tell me that there aren't enough qualified men who would love to be Secret Service agents. I don't believe it. That's nonsense. We aren't putting women in these roles as some sort of desperate last resort. We are, in fact, excluding men specifically so that we can include these women. And it's indefensible. There is no valid reason for it. There just isn't. Women are not fit to be Secret Service agents, period. Why aren't they fit? Well, for one thing, they're too physically weak for the job. They lack the physical strength required to suitably protect the people that the Secret Service are supposed to be protecting. And also, and this is the part that I guess is supposed to be more controversial, also, women are, on average, too emotional for these kinds of jobs. Women are much more emotional than men. That's just a fact. And guess what? There's nothing wrong with that. Actually, I think it's great. I'm glad that women, like my wife is a much more emotional person than I am, which I know you could say is like not saying much. It's a pretty low bar when it comes to emotion with me, but still, she's a much more emotional person than I am. And that's wonderful. I'm glad she is. I'm glad she isn't this like stoic, serious, stone-faced statue like I am. I can't imagine being married to that. Who would want that? So I'm very glad for that. So women being emotional doesn't have to be a problem. It doesn't have to be an indictment. It doesn't have to be a pitfall or a flaw. It only becomes a flaw when we put them in situations where being emotional is a liability, which in many cases it's not. And there are plenty of cases where having, being a more emotional person, being more, empathetic, wearing your heart on your sleeve a little bit more. There are contexts where that's a strength, where that's where you want that. But there are times where it's a liability, and that's a Secret Service agent on the battlefield. Right? You want people who are, on average, stronger, less emotional, more stoic. And guess what? That's always going to be men. Okay? That's always going to be men. That's what you need men for. It's like for stuff like that. Yep, that's... You got a job where you need someone with some physical strength, somebody who's a bit more stoic, someone who contains their emotions. A man is always going to be going to fit that bill more. And, this is where so much of the modern tension between the sexes comes from. When we hear that sexism is on the rise or whatever, that anti-woman sentiments are on the rise, it comes from this. It comes from insisting that women be crowbarred into positions that they just are not suited for, and that it's okay they aren't suited for. There are roles that men are not suited for. I've said many times, I would never in a million years hire a man to babysit my kids. Not in a million years would I do that. There's just no way. Hiring, and most people feel the same way. Now, of course, the left will respond and say, oh, so you're saying that women are fit for childcare and they're more fit for childcare than they are for being Secret Service agents. That's insulting. Well, I am saying that, yes, but interpreting it as insulting is your choice. That is a reflection of your values and your priorities. Don't project that onto me. I think caring for children is a very important role in society. If you don't think that, that's your problem. So when I say that, well, women are more fit for childcare, That's not me saying, oh, that's like a childcare is this contemptible thing that's beneath. That apparently is the way you look at it. But if you're on the left, I don't see it that way. In fact, from my perspective, caring for my children is more important than protecting the president. Okay, I know that's not the case from like the nation's perspective, but from my perspective, you know, if I'm choosing someone to take care of my kids, it's a lot more important to me that that person is suited for the job than it is that a Secret Service agent is suited. I care more about my kids than I do about the president, obviously, and we all do about our own kids. And so my point is that if I'm looking for childcare, let's say, then to me, they're my kids. Like, that's a really important job. Are you kidding me? That's incredibly important. And that's a job where I would always choose a woman. And because I think women are more suited for that. Men and women are different. They're suited for different things. But again, so much of the tension, you know, comes from our denial of this fact. And it's like if there was some law passed that said that every NBA team had to include at least one short person. You know, and the short person has to be a starter on the team, right? At least one person below average height has to be on the court at all times for both teams, right? Now, I have no bias against short people. I don't hate short people. I have no issue with them. You know, I look down at them and I say, "How's it going down there, little guy?" That, you know, I don't, no judgment at all. You know, I pat them on the head and say, "Oh, there, short little guy." I mean, that's, you know, because I'm very nice to short people, but and I have no hate for them. But I would hate them in that role if they were forced into it. I would hate if I loved basketball, which I don't really, and the product has already been destroyed by the NBA. But let's just pretend that I like basketball and the product has not been destroyed yet. Well, shoehorning in short people into basketball would destroy the product on the court. And I would hate that. I wouldn't hate them as people, but I would hate them for that role. I would hate them in that position. I would hate that they're in that position. And you know, and then you might say, "Oh, well, you hate short people. You have an anti-short person bias." No, I don't. Short people are fine. I have no beef with them. When you randomly demand that they be included in this position where they don't belong, where they're not suited, well, now you've created a context where I am anti-short person in that context. Not in general, but just in that context. But you've created that. You've created this tension that didn't have to be there. So it's the same thing with women. I'm not anti-women, obviously. My favorite person on earth is my wife. She's a woman. I have daughters. I love them more than my own life. I jump in front of a bullet for them without, you know, hesitation. So how can I hate women? It's actually impossible. But I am anti-woman Secret Service agents. I am anti-woman in combat in those particular contexts. So if you're looking around and you say, "Oh, there's all this anti-woman sentiment," well, it's like a lot of it, if not all of it, it comes from taking these groups and just like shoehorning them into contexts where they just don't belong there. And so you are creating that. When you institute these policies, you are creating those contexts where this tension and this these you know, negative feelings are going to come about as a result. So that's how you sort that out. Pro-life advocates need to know this. Despite the overturning of Roe v. Wade, abortions actually increased by nearly 1% last year. That's over 100,000 additional procedures happening, bringing the total to an estimate that's over 1 million per year. These numbers show the urgent need for action beyond legal victories. Preborn is directly addressing this crisis. Their network of clinics operates in the area with the highest abortion rates, providing immediate support to women facing unplanned pregnancies. They offer compassionate care and free ultrasounds, helping women see and connect with their babies, because when women hear a fetal heartbeat, they're twice as likely to choose life. Last year alone, Preborn helped over 67,000 women choose to continue their pregnancies. But the numbers show that there's critical work still to be done. Right now, women are walking into abortion clinics who could be reached with the right support and the right resources. Your monthly support of $28 directly funds this life-saving work. Every day matters when over 1 million lives hang in the balance. Preborn has proven results in changing hearts and saving lives, but they need sustained support to expand their reach where it's needed most. To donate, simply dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby. That's pound 250 baby, or visit preborn.com/Walsh. That's preborn.com/Walsh. Right now, all DailyWire Plus annual memberships are 40% off, including all access memberships. That means ad-free daily shows from the most trusted voices in conservative media, access to our full library of original films, documentaries, and series, early access to offers and announcements before anyone else, and members-only content you won't find anywhere else. Now's the time to join and save 40%. Go to DailyWirePlus.com and use code DW40. Now let's get to our daily cancellation. Well, it's that time of year again. Students are graduating from universities all over the country after several years of hard work, or very little work in many cases. They're getting their diplomas and heading out into the real world. And you know what that means? It's time to see whether the University of California, Berkeley remains the undisputed champion in the very competitive category of most degrading, unwatchable, and humiliating commencement ceremony on the planet. Now, as you might remember, a couple of years ago, Berkeley took the crown by unanimous decision after this moment went viral, depicting the scene at their black-only commencement ceremony. Yes, in defiance of civil rights laws and basic standards of ethics, as well as common sense, Berkeley kicked all the white people and Asians out and held a segregated graduation for the black students only. And here's a brief snippet of what that looked like.
Aramis Anderson said, "The last shall be first and the first shall be last." Receiving a Bachelor of Arts in Disciplinary Studies field, Political Economy, Legal Studies, and African American Studies. He said, "Disbursement and allocation, reparations for African Americans."
So if you're listening to the audio podcast, the graduates are doing a lot of jumping around and crawling around on the stage. Onlookers are quite thrilled by it. Very proud of, what was that, Bachelor's in Political Economy? Just minutes and minutes of work required to obtain a degree of that kind. So that's what's going on there. But what you cannot do under any circumstances is deny that Berkeley accomplished something really special here. They set the standard. You know, every other school in the country really needed to up their game after this if they wanted to undermine the credibility and integrity of their own commencement ceremonies, and by extension, the credibility and integrity of the degrees that they were awarding. So let's see. How have other schools been doing since this incident? What have they learned from Berkeley after taking some time in the off-season to train hard and become woke grandmasters? How exactly are they going to dethrone Berkeley as the international champion of unwatchable graduation ceremonies? Well, the other day, a listener sent me a tip about the commencement that just took place a few days ago at the University of California School of Law, which was previously known as the University of California Hastings School of Law until around 2 years ago. But then they changed their name, sort of like the Redskins, and for similar reasons, as you'll see in a second. Admittedly, it's a 2-hour ceremony. I didn't have time or anywhere near the interest to watch the whole thing, but it didn't take long for Hastings to formally enter the competition for Berkeley's throne and make the very strong showing of their own. So behold the first minutes of the University of California Law School's commencement. Here it is.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Albert Sinker, and I serve as chair of the board of directors of UC Law. Before we begin our program, it is now our tradition to do so at the start of every commencement. We acknowledge today that 2 decades before the founding of the school, Serenus Hastings was involved in the establishment of a militia and other acts that resulted in the brutal slayings of Yuki people who lived in the renowned and East Valley areas of California. Currently, UC Law is engaged in restorative justice initiatives that will provide educational opportunities for their youth. While we cannot erase our past, we can make sure that the past does not continue to impact the future of the Yuki and other indigenous people of the Eden and Round Valley areas.
So just to be very clear about this, this is the first minute. I mean, the first thing he says at this commencement ceremony for graduates is a lengthy apology for the old name of their school. He's really, really sorry that the school in the past used to be named for a prominent lawyer and politician named Serenus Hastings. And apparently Hastings mistreated something called the Yuki people, and therefore the school is going to engage in restorative justice. And he gets a lot of applause for this, as you just saw. Now let's just assume for a second that the narrative surrounding Serenus Hastings is true, and that he was an awful person who mistreated the Yukis, whoever, whatever they are. Even given that assumption, this commencement speaker still has to answer the following question. If the University of California School of Law really wants to pay penance to the Yuki people, and if they're really on stolen land or whatever, then, again, going back to what we talked about earlier, why don't they give the descendants of the Yuki people the deed to every building in the campus and every school in the University of California system? They could do that immediately if they wanted to. They could hand over every cent of the University of California's $30 billion endowment. But they're not doing that because they don't actually believe anything they're saying. They'd rather taunt the poor Yuki people, God rest their souls. Now, of course, all of this slander about Serenus Hastings was invented circa 2017 by left-wing professors looking to demonize a white guy because, of course, it was fashionable to do so at the time. In 2023, the California Supreme Court's Historical Society Review published a thorough review of Serenus Hastings' life. And this review found that, quote, there's no assertion and no evidence that he killed or knew in advance of any plan to kill Indians. In fact, he testified under oath in the legislature's 1860 investigation into the Mendocino Indian Wars that he had no knowledge of any Indian killings before they occurred. Rather, the claim by critics is that by petitioning the governor to commission a local militia that came to be known as the Eel River Rangers, Hastings was effectively in control of the Rangers, close quote. So in other words, the administration of this law school concocted a way to smear their school's namesake, and it falls apart under any scrutiny whatsoever. They're saying that he asked for a militia to form, and therefore he's responsible for everything the militia did. That's the allegation. And yet, even though their claims are extremely flimsy and incoherent, they're still apologizing for the old name of their school anyway. So, and I guess they're going to do this at every graduation ceremony, for all time. So that's pretty embarrassing. And there were other humiliating moments from this commencement, too, from the students wearing gay pride flags to one speaker's defense of Abrego Garcia, the illegal immigrant gangster and wife beater. But the real question isn't whether this ceremony was embarrassing. The question is whether it's as embarrassing as Berkeley's from 2023, because, again, that's the standard. So let's bracket that whole ceremony for now and move on because there's a lot of competition. Here, for example, is a clip from Jennifer Coolidge's address at Emerson College's commencement and in Massachusetts a few weeks ago. Apparently, this woman is, oh yeah, I recognize her. She's from, what was that show again? White Lotus, yeah, isn't that her? Anyway, here she is. Let's watch.
I just want you to know that I'm excited that I'm speaking with, some very excited gay students. Hetero students.
Now, in case you couldn't make it out, she says, quote, I'm excited that I'm speaking with some very excited gay students and some less exciting hetero students. And that line went over really well, as you could tell. In particular, they can't get enough of this little speech on Reddit. In response to the clip, one of the most upvoted posts reads, quote, she nails comedy. Another post reads, I already started my day by dreading all the heteros I have to face, LMAO. And then there's this one quote, people are gay/bi until they come out as straight. So it's all very dumb and embarrassing. But again, the question is, just how dumb and embarrassing is it, relatively speaking? You say what you will about the dancing students at the all-black Berkeley commencement ceremony, but they didn't inspire swarms of gay men on Reddit to sing their praises. That's another level of humiliation, one that only Emerson College has obtained thus far. But again, it's a very crowded field, so let's continue. Here's the commencement address, also just from the last week or two, that 60 Minutes newsreader Scott Pelley just delivered at Wake Forest, one of the most deranged institutions in the country. This is the same university that defended a medical student who bragged about injuring a patient who mocked her preferred pronouns. And now they've got the 60 Minutes guy, supposedly a serious newsman, delivering a rambling, hyper-partisan speech at their graduation. Watch.
But in this morning, our sacred rule of law is under attack. Journalism is under attack. Universities are under attack. Freedom of speech is under attack. And insidious fear is reaching through our schools, our businesses, our homes, and into our private thoughts. The fear to speak in America. Power can rewrite history with grotesque, false narratives. They can make criminals heroes and heroes criminals. Power can change the definition of the words we use to describe reality. Diversity is now described as illegal. Equity is to be shunned. Inclusion is a dirty word. This is an old playbook, my friends. There's nothing new in this.
Now, just to be very clear, when he says they're making criminals heroes, he is somehow not talking about George Floyd. And when he says that people are afraid to speak in America, he's somehow not talking about the Christians who can't even have a concert without being attacked, physically assaulted by, Antifa militants. So he's not talking about any of that. Now, there's one great quote in that word vomit, mainly because it makes no sense whatsoever in the context. He says, quote, "Power can change the definition of the words we use to describe reality." He really thinks that's a profound statement. It's supposed to be very chilling. And then to illustrate his point, he proceeds to say that the current administration thinks equity is dumb and that the DEI programs are illegal, whereas the previous administration embraced equity and DEI. That doesn't mean that the current administration is changing the definition of equity or DEI. Instead, the administration is just saying that these practices are unconstitutional and immoral. And that's a pretty big point that Scott Pelley doesn't seem to grasp, even as he seems to think he's struck gold. He's really proud of himself here, waving his arms around. He thinks he's making a really profound point, even though he's making no sense whatsoever. But the real irony, of course, in this statement is that the entire point of the leftist project, going back more than a decade at this point, is exactly what Scott Pelley accuses the right of doing. The left's goal is to change the definition of words that we use to describe reality. I mean, no reasonable person can deny that. They're the ones who decided on a whim that the word woman means anyone who says they're a woman. They're the ones who decided that gender is a meaningless term that can describe a limitless number of fake identities, with new fake identities being added every day. They're the ones who have redefined marriage so that pretty much anything qualifies. These are the people who are changing the definition of words that we use to describe reality. But the CBS newsman is too dumb to realize that that's what he's really saying, so he doesn't realize that he's sort of making our point for us. In any event, we'll introduce one more contender just to try to cover our bases, even though it's probably a losing battle. As I go through these, it's becoming more and more evident that Berkeley is probably going to retain the throne, retain the crown. But here's a speaker at the commencement ceremony of Middlebury College in Vermont, and this was back in February. Watch how she describes her reaction to Trump's re-election. And the footage is sped up a little bit, but it's still, relatively comprehensible. And it's good that it's sped up because it's so stupid and unbearable that, you want to get through it as fast as you can. But here it is. Watch.
Ways that Middlebury fails its students make this sobering truth abundantly clear. This is heartbreaking. If there's anything you hear of what I'm saying, let it be this. When our hearts break, let them break open like pomegranates and burst with seeds that can take root. We are literally graduating the same month a fascist has taken office. Within 11 days, he has pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement for the second time, denied the existence of trans people, and unleashed a slew of ICE agents to arrest an average of 1,000 people every single day since they began. As global citizens, we cannot just focus on the violence of this campus or in the United States. We must extend our moral imagination to every life on this planet.
Let's go back to that money line again, because it's really quite beautiful. She says, quote, "If there's anything you hear in what I'm saying, let it be this. When our hearts break, let them break open like pomegranates and burst with seeds that can take root. We are literally graduating the same month a fascist is taking office. Within 11 days, he pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement for the second time." Close quote. Now, as far as metaphors go, you might say that it's, pretty bad. When our hearts break, let them break open like pomegranates. But then she manages to outdo herself. She says, as evidence of her claim that the president is a fascist like Adolf Hitler, that he, quote, pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement. That's the new standard for fascism, according to the commencement speaker at Middlebury College in Vermont. It turns out that you don't need a totalitarian one-party state. You don't need state control over the media or an all-encompassing government-mandated ideology in every aspect of your life. Instead, all you need is to pull out of a non-binding international agreement to lower your carbon emissions. An agreement that no one, including the largest polluter on the planet, is taking seriously anyway. That's it. Oh, and you also have to deny the existence of trans people. That's what fascism is, apparently. But as humiliating as this speech is, the question remains, just how humiliating is it? How does it compare to Berkeley's all-black graduation, or the stark lack of self-awareness from the 60 Minutes anchor at Wake Forest, or the land acknowledgement at the University of California Hastings School of Law, or the sassy gay pride moment at Emerson? If I'm being honest, I'd have to say that Berkeley probably retains its crown. All these other schools are making a serious effort to degrade the credibility of their institutions, but their efforts simply lack the visual impact of Berkeley's ceremony from 2023. We're experiencing yet another off year in the woke Olympics, is what I'm saying. But as the good coaches say, there's always next year. And that is why the University of California Hastings School of Law and every other institution that hosted a woke commencement ceremony this year is today canceled. That'll do it for the show today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Talk to you tomorrow. Have a great day. Godspeed.
A Harvard professor gets fired for lying in a study about dishonesty. That's just perfect. Antifa members attack a prayer rally, and a record number of Americans say that the country is on the right track. Check it out on The Michael Knowles Show.